the family. Last week we were going through and looking at the creation and fall of the family. Before that, we kind of addressed why even study the Bible regarding the family, and we kind of started working through this idea and understanding that really if we're going to learn about something, it's important to go to the source, the one who made it. We talked about teleology, the end of things, the purpose of things, why do we do things the way that we do. And today we're going to be looking at the purpose of marriage and the family. And of course, we could probably spend weeks on this. This is just kind of looking at the surface. We're kind of just getting the 30,000 foot view. And Lord willing, as time goes on, we're going to be looking into these things more closely through the coming weeks. One of the things that we see as we talk about the family and words in general, I don't know about you, do words often change meaning over time as we go through the last 100 years or so? I mean, you could see some of the changes, probably just within a few generations. For instance, cool. What does cool mean? Well, it used to mean you touched an object and it was cool to the touch, right? But now you use the word cool and it's like, well, that's neat, or sometimes that's not neat. It's used sarcastically. Well, that's cool. In other words, it's not. There's different ways of communicating, but one of the things that we find when we're talking about trying to understand purpose and meaning of things, definitions matter, don't they? When we say father, we should have a pretty good understanding of what a father is. When we say mother, we should understand what mother is. When we say marriage, is there an actual definition, or is it something that we can put our own definition into? How about family? Is there an actual definition of what family is, or do we get to put our own definition in? And when words and meanings start getting their original meanings get taken out, and now we can put whatever we want into it, now we're starting to lose the purpose for those things as well. If a car is not just a vehicle that you drive, but a car could be a potted plant or a plant pot, now you really don't know what a car is anymore, or what its purpose is. Is it for holding flowers? Although I've seen some pretty old clunker cars turned into flower beds, but that's not the same thing, is it, right? That's not what we're talking. This is a car. It's used as a flower garden. Well, is that really what it was? Was that the original reason for the building of the car, or is that what it's been repurposed for? So trying to think through those things. Definitions and understanding of those definitions matter as well when you're trying to do things, correct? So for instance, say you're baking bread. And so you're reading the recipe, and it says 2 cups. And you go, well, what's a cup? Is it like I go into the cabinet and I find my favorite cup? As in, like, I like this one, it has a nice decoration on it. And so I fill 2 of these full of flour, and then I pour them into the bowl. Or is there, when I'm reading these, if I say 2 cups, I know that is a particular measurement of, and depending on if it's dry or a wet ingredient, right, it's slightly different, right? There's a wet cup and a dry cup, and Janice knows what I'm talking about. A wet cup and a dry cup, right? And there's measurements that matter. Well, and so I'm reading through and I'm like 2 cups. So I'm going to go, well, and do they have to be the same size cup? Because maybe I picked this, but this one's also my favorite cup, and I don't want my other favorite cup to feel left out. I understand I'm putting emotional feelings into inanimate objects, but so I take 2 different cups, so it's quicker, right? So I can just pour 2 cups, and they're different sizes, and I put the flour in, and then I go, 2 tisps. What's a tisp? 2 tisps of what's a tisp? Yeah. And is it a tisp or tibs, right? What's that? Well, that's up for interpretation. I can do whatever I want with it. And you see, what we're doing is when you're making bread, some definitions of what things are. And it's, 2 cups of flour. So I go out and cut some geraniums out of the front yard and put them in the bowl. You understand that there's understanding of definitions and knowing what things are before we even start are important. And then, so why do I let my bread rise, right? What's the purpose of doing it this way? Why do I not put scalding hot water in, just warm water in with my yeast? What happens when you put scalding hot water in with yeast, Janice? It kills it. My mom made she got really good at it making, I forgot what they're called. Not scones. I only know, they're the ones where you cut them into a triangle and croissants. My mom made really good croissants, but the first time she made it, she killed the yeast. And so we all know croissants by the nickname one of our deacons called them was hockey pucks, because they were hard. There was no yeast. They were hard as bricks, or hockey pucks. But all of those things, we understand there's a purpose for why we do things the way we do. If you do things out of order, what happens if I try baking the flour and then putting the rest of the ingredients in? Nothing happens, right? It's just you have hot flour. It doesn't work very well. So these sort of things are helpful when we're thinking through the purpose of marriage and the family. God in his word has communicated things to us about the purpose. And sometimes we look at it and you're like, well, that's really simplistic. I don't mind simplistic. It's helpful. That doesn't mean that there aren't nuances. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get expanded. It doesn't mean that things go beyond what they are. But when we're talking about the purpose of marriage and the family, well, it's nice to kind of have a nice, big picture, right? We like having a big picture. So we're going to turn in our Bibles to Genesis again. We've been starting in Genesis. Genesis chapter 2. Actually, we're going to go, we're going to go to Genesis 2. And we have 4 P's this morning. 4 P's. So we have partnership, we have procreation, we have productivity and protection. There's more purposes for marriage than those, but I figured that will give us more than enough to get through this morning. And they weren't P's, so they didn't make the cut. No, just kidding. That's not why. But anyway, so we're going to look at those and kind of work through just thinking about those things. Now, if we were to say, what is the purpose, or what's the purpose of life? One of the things that you could say is the chief end of man is to love God and enjoy him forever, right? However, we're also told in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. So if we were to put this big picture, the goal of marriage is to glorify God, we'd be like, yeah, we could get behind that, right? We go, yeah, that's a good thing. The problem is often when we're talking about, well, we want to glorify God in whatever it is, if we stop there, there's not a whole lot of actual instruction, is there? Our goal is to glorify God, but now we need to know how. And so our goal this morning, as we look at this, is to see what are some basic ways that we can live out glorifying God in marriage and family. So we're going to start with companionship. So we're in Genesis 2. God has made creation and he has made man. But then we find in Genesis 2:18, then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." So it is interesting. We've already talked about this some. God is Trinity, correct? He did not create man so that he knew what having a relationship and interaction was like. He's complete, he's perfect. He's three persons in one God. But he created man with the intent of relationship and interaction and partnership and fellowship. And we see this. This is the first time as God is creating where he says that something is not good. Remember, he created the heavens and the earth, and it was very good. And then he created the dry land, and it was very good. And then he created the light, the plants and the animals and the birds and the fish. And everything was very good until he got to man being alone, and that was when it was not good. And so we walked through this last week where God gave man a job, a task, a purpose, named the animals, and we see he found that there was no animal suitable for him. And the idea here for suitable is an exact fit or to correspond with. In other words, it's of a like kind and it complements. And the joke about the dog is man's best friend and all of those things. Well, no, actually, no. God created men and women to complement and to complement one another, to help one another, to interact with one another, to engage one another. And there was no other creature in God's creation that was like Adam. And so God, we see what happened in verse 21. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in that place. By the way, it's interesting, just as a side note, you can grow ribs back. Especially if it's one of the smaller ones. You have full ribs that come around and connect to your sternum, but then you actually have smaller ribs down in here that kind of fan out, but they don't go all the way around. And you can actually regrow ribs. So it's not like Adam went through his whole life missing one rib. It's very likely in the 900 years that he lived, 900 plus years, he probably grew it back. So it's very, very interesting how that worked. So just something that was a freebie. So he closed up the flesh. Then God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. Now, there's a few different things that could be said. And maybe we'll get into this as time goes on. But one of the jokes is, why did God put man to sleep when he created the woman? Well, for one, it was anesthesia, right? I don't know if I'd want a rib taken out without being asleep for it. But then on the other side, God had him asleep so that, did man have any input into the making of the female? No. God knew what was best. God knew what he was doing. Did God make several options? No. And then take your pick. No, God formed a particular woman for Adam. Now, we live in a world where there's lots of women. I chose my wife, and she said, or I decided I want to ask Missy to marry me, and then she consented. And then we got married. But at the same time, once we're married, who did God have? It becomes very clear, who did God have in store for me? My wife. I don't get to go, well, maybe I made a mistake at this point, because that's who God gave me. Now I'm married to my wife. I'm committed to my wife. And that's who God has given me. Are there times, we see in the Bible, have have there been foolish decisions made regarding spouses? Yeah. Should that have not happened? Yes. But here's the thing. Once you're married, that is God's plan. And God's plan for that is for you to be committed to that spouse. That's the way it is. We don't get a do-over. That's the way God made it. But we see that God made a particular woman for a particular man, and it was very good. And so this is what we have. And we see, now, did Adam have to go out looking for Eve afterwards? No. God brought her to him. Do you realize that the whole idea of the father giving the bride away is a picture of this? That's part of what this is. And then he brought her to the man. This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. And so God brings the woman to the man. And there's other places where you have man and you have woman, but when you bring them together, do you know what they're called? Man. When they're together, it's mankind. This is why when they get married, when a man and woman get married, the wife takes her husband's name. This is all very early on. This is mimicking and replicating and following the pattern that's given to us right in the first few chapters of Genesis. That's why a wife should take her husband's name. A wife who doesn't take her husband's name is just keeping her father's name. That's all that's taking place. And it just shows, we learned about this last week, and we're not really getting into it this week, but he's her head, right? He's the one that she is under his authority. And authority is not a bad thing. So this is some of what is being pictured. Now we see one flesh. Now this is regarding the physical union and physical consummation of marriage. It is not only that, but it is part of that. If you consider this, it is not just the first time the marriage is consummated, but every time. And what is happening is that physical union between a husband and his wife is a picture of everything else that is taking place. The one flesh is the way that they think, the way that they interact. It's not, and when God brought them together, it wasn't like, okay, so Eve must think exactly like Adam in everything. In other words, thinking exactly the same thoughts at exactly the same time all the time, or vice versa. That's not what that is. God wired men and women differently to think about things from different points of view. That's not a bad thing, but they're unified, they're going together, they're on the same team. They're not trying to go in opposite directions. They're not trying to have my agenda here and her agenda here, or her agenda here and his agenda here. They're going in a direction. God had given man a task, guard and keep and to tend the garden, and then God created Eve to tend the gardener, to be attentive. And so their direction and orientation of what they're looking at, what their focus is slightly different but complementary. They go together. They work together. That's the way it's designed. And this is the way God created things. It is not wrong for us to think about partnership and companionship in marriage as a God-ordained or God-designed thing. If you look at, actually, so let's keep our fingers here, but let's go to Matthew 19. Matthew 19, starting in verse 3. Because Jesus is asked a question of the religious leaders about marriage, particularly about divorce. And what we see is that Jesus goes back to the beginning to define how God made things as a way of understanding how God made the world and how they're supposed to be. So, some Pharisees came to Jesus, testing him and asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all?" And he, that is Jesus, answered and said, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Now, is quite interesting. In today's society, people who are trying to use the Bible to defend homosexual marriage, they'll say Jesus never said anything about homosexuality. Well, that may be true. Well, he didn't condemn them like Paul did. And so Paul obviously was not in agreement with Jesus, is what they try to say. But what do we see in this passage right here? When Jesus was asked about what the structure of marriage is supposed to look like, where does he go? Back to Genesis, back to the way that God, by the way, Jesus was there, made it, and how it was supposed to be designed. One man, one woman for life. That's the way God designed it. He didn't say that was up for interpretation. Two men or two women, or one man and two women, or two women and one man, or two men and one woman. It doesn't say anything about that. And so when Jesus is asked about questions about marriage, he goes right back to Genesis as the structure. So this is not just this is what happened, but this is also prescriptive in the way that you're supposed to understand marriage, going back to Genesis. All right. If you're taking notes, Mark 10, 2 through 9 is an example of the same incident, just in a different book. So here we have the idea of partnership or companionship. It was not good for man to be alone. So God created a helpmeet, a helper, someone who would help him. And so just as a side note, I'm going to read to you from Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And Solomon says this about just partnership or companionship in general. Starting in verse 9, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor." Interestingly, when you consider it, as long as there's no distractions, my dad would sometimes ask my grandfather if he could have a friend over to help with chores. My grandfather's favorite saying was, "One boy's a boy, two boys is half a boy, and three boys is no boy at all." And what he meant by that is if you have one boy, you'll get one boy's worth of work. If you get two boys together, you'll get half a boy's worth of work. And if you get three boys, you're not going to get anything worth of a boy's worth of work. My dad said the same thing to me growing up. That's not what we're talking about. But I don't know if you've noticed, if you have someone that you can work well with, and you're both working hard, you can get more than twice as much work done as if you worked by yourself, right? It's exponentiated. And so we have two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion, but woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Just ask Misty. In the middle of the winter, like she's usually freezing cold when we first go to bed. And so she's like, "Oh, please, I'm so cold, and more blankets." And then about halfway through the night, I'm freezing, and I'm like trying to find more blankets. So it's interesting how that works, right? And then if one can overpower him who is alone, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. And so we see partnership as an important thing, and God created man and woman to work together as partners, together, helping each other's strengths and weaknesses. We saw it last week, the fall, right? And marriage is a blessing, or can be a blessing. Proverbs 18:22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing." Proverbs 19:14 says, "House and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord." It's commended. It's a good thing. But we addressed partnership, companionship, but also we talked about the one flesh union. And this is every aspect of it, not just physical consummation. By the way, physical consummation in marriage is a barometer for the other things. If you are not doing well spiritually, emotionally, working together, guess what? Physical consummation does not really occur the way that it should. If things are not doing well on the other aspects, the physical relationship between a husband and wife is a barometer of the relationship as a whole. But now we come to procreation. So let's go back a chapter to Genesis chapter 1. And what do we see starting in verse 26? God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over it, the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So Adam was not going to be capable of tilling and tending the entire planet by himself. So God gave him a helper. It is interesting the way that God created things. God designed mankind to require both a man and a woman to procreate. You don't see women getting pregnant by themselves. And I'm very thankful men can't get pregnant. But you don't see men producing children by themselves. God created it to require both a man and a woman, and information from both the man and the woman, the X and the Y chromosomes. Information given comes from both fathers and mothers. And any attempt to distort, any distortion of marriage is not actually marriage. Consider this: 2 men together are barren, right? They're not going to produce any kids. There's no possibility. 2 women together are barren. There is no possibility of kids. Now, do we understand that there are couples who have spent years and years trying to have kids who are not able to? We do understand that. And that is not them, oh, they're not obeying God because they're not having kids. They're not, even though they're trying to have kids and they're not able to. What is that a result of? That's a result of the curse, right? We live in a sin-cursed world. There's problems. Procreation does not always happen. There are defects. There are problems. There are miscarriages. My wife and I, Misty and I, have experience with that. We've lost a child in between the 2 children we have. And that was a hard thing, and it can still be a hard thing. But that is not the norm. We understand that that is the result of the fall. That's the result of sin, of a sin-cursed world, right? That's the reality that we live in. However, we see that overall God designed marriage as a way that children are produced, right? And children can be what? Exponentiations. And they make a family's potential greater, right? There's like that joke about farmers having lots of kids because it's free help. All right, and that's not entirely the case. My dad grew up on a farm. There was 5 kids, and they got paid, but they also were contributing together to have the farm be successful. And so they were taught and trained. My dad remembers at a very young age, when he was about 4 years old, sitting on the tractor with the bucket and basically being told, just keep the steering wheel straight to the end of the field while we put rocks in it, picking rocks, because they were in central New York and the ground grew rocks. And so before you planted stuff, you had to go through and you had to pick out all the big stones and put them in the bucket of the tractor, and you had to go and dump the bucket at the end of the field. Well, because my dad at 4 or 5 years old was able to hold the steering wheel, that made the job of everyone else greater. I don't know if you could get away with doing that nowadays, but anyway, they have more power steering now, so it's okay. But that's what happens is kids, you don't want to use the word used well, but kids who, if you are thinking through and seeing that they're not just there to entertain you or there to be entertained, they're not pets. They're creatures made in the image of God with purpose and intention. And it is good for them to be taught to work and to play is a good thing too, but to learn tasks and to see that life is not all about them, but actually to produce. I like the analogy. God gave us 2 hands and 1 mouth. We should produce twice as much as we consume. That's kind of the way that God created us. And so teaching our kids that. We understand we live in a world where legislature and legislation has attempted to say that marriage can be between any 2 people that they want. But what we see, the reality is that is like trying to legislate that water will now flow uphill, right? Just because you pass something into law doesn't make it true. Or saying that the sun will no longer be hot, or that the sun will no longer shine. It's not going to happen. That just because you say something is so doesn't mean that it is so. And what we see is, and we're living in a time, and we were talking in the parenting class on Tuesday, what we call freedom today, freedom to do whatever we want, is about like jumping off of Cathedral Ledge. It feels like flying for a few seconds. And it feels really, really free for a little while, but it ultimately ends up in what? Disaster and destruction. And that's the society that we live in when they're trying to push back and to deny the reality that God has made. Jumping off a cliff is not flying. Gravity still works. Water will continue to flow downhill. That's just the way it is. And so things to consider when we do that. But producing children is not merely enough. We have talked about this some already, but let's go over to Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6. Moses is preparing the people to enter the promised land. They are getting ready, and they're given instructions. And in Deuteronomy 6, starting in verse 4, now I find this very interesting. Look at the order of how things happen. God is going to Moses is going to declare things that are true about God, and then go into instructions. So, verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. There's truth. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Every part of you, loving God. You will teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals for your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Is our understanding of God and relationship of God and the truths about God and the truths about the world that he has made a part of everyday conversation. They should be. We are designed to learn by imitation. You didn't go to class to learn English, well, as in grammar. You learned English and being able to speak, not because you went to a class, but you did what? You learned from your parents. We even learn accents, right? We know some people have more of an accent than others. I don't know where it came from. I'm like, wait, where did that come from? And then I hear my grandmother talking, and I go, oh, that's where that came from. So interesting things along those lines. So we have this ongoing, not that there isn't a place for sitting down and we're going to discuss certain truths, we're going to talk about certain things about God, but it is an as we go, on the way, as we live life, the conversations that we have. We don't necessarily have to sit down and have an hour-long conversation about something, but as things come up, as kids ask questions, don't say, well, I don't have time to answer that. Well, as we're doing this, we're going to work through. We're going to start bringing things up. And that also requires intentionality, right? So me as a father, thinking about, here's some things that I have in mind of that I want to address with my kids so that they're starting to think about it. And we're running out of time already. But one of the things that we see is that repetition is key, isn't it? Proverbs 4. If you're taking notes, that's a really good place to read through. You see instructions from a father to a son, and there's a lot of repetition. And there's actually several different times that, listen, my son. Are you listening, my son? Pay attention, my son. Those several things throughout the book of Proverbs. And in Proverbs chapter 4, there's repetition there of, it's almost like he knows that his kid is going to get distracted partway through the giving of instructions. Go figure. We've all been there. So just one of those things where we see the instruction and intentionality, but then as we go along. We see in Proverbs 13:24, he who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Just having kids is not enough. Kids are to be trained and to be equipped. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. By the way, that doesn't necessarily always happen, but here's the thing. If you respond to situations in a certain way, if our kids learn by imitation, what are they going to do? They're going to learn to respond to the situations in the same way. And guess what? Often kids take what their parents do and take it one step further, right? That's often how students go, right? So if we see things in our kids and we go, I am like looking at myself, my own problems. We've never done that, right? I go, oh, what is this? What's happening? They are going in the way that they've been trained. In the way that we respond, in the way that we interact, in the way that we talk, in the way that we do things. Proverbs 29:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. Pretty clear. But then there's also instructions. So let's go to Colossians 3. Colossians 3. So this, remember, we've done We've done partnership or companionship. We're at procreation, but procreation isn't enough. Producing children is not enough. There's discipleship that's required. And I can't talk and flip at the same time, so hold on. So Colossians 3, verse 21. And here we are. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they will not lose heart. There's a warning there. The word there is provoke. It can be used in a positive sense, provoke one another to love and good works, but there's also a way that a father and mothers can provoke their children to lose heart. Are we harsh? Are we rigid? Are in such a way that I want to talk to Dad about this, but I know that he is just going to come down hard and not actually listen to me when I come and ask him a question. And so I'm just going to shut up and not say anything because I'd rather not feel the displeasure of my father, so I'm just discouraged, and I'm not going to make Dad happy anyway, so why bother? So they do not lose heart. The lose heart there is to be disheartened, dispirited, broken in spirit, or even to have courage taken away. And the way a father interacts with their children can either give them courage, encourage courage, or it can take it away. And for the record, I've seen in my own life both sides of it. And the way that a father interacts with their children is a powerful thing. It's an important thing. It's Father's Day, by the way. All right, Ephesians 6. Let's flip over to Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The word there, obey, is, and hupakuo, which actually it's to be under hupa, and akuo is like, listen, you're under listening. It's the idea of a porter, so someone at the door waiting for a knock and responding quickly to it. So children are to be obedient, in other words, quick to listen. And that isn't by the third time and my voice is higher, the tone is changed, now I obey. This is when I give an instruction, they respond. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. This is the way that God would have it. Honor your father and mother. Honor is value. It means to revere. All right, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live upon the earth, long upon the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And by this, it's not saying your children will never get angry with correction. This is, don't provoke them to anger in the way that you're responding. Remember, they respond by mimicry. They learn by mimicking. If a father, James 1, 19 through 21, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. Things to consider. We have to hurry, move along. So we're scooped. We're gonna, but reproduction or procreation is not enough. How we raise children matters. But then we have productivity. And we kind of saw this a little bit about a helper. The word for helper in Genesis 2:18 has the idea of to make firm, strengthen, or counterpart. We see in the New Testament in Titus 2, the wife is to help her husband. What is interesting in 1 Timothy 5:14, it says this, therefore I want younger widows to get married bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach. The word there for keep house is oikos despotes. Literally means house despot. If my wife says, I want everyone, when they come in the house, to take their shoes off, as her husband, I'm undermining my own authority by not taking my shoes off like she's asked me to. Because I asked her to be my wife, she consented, became my wife, and now she has placed herself under my authority, but she has management of the home, and if there's something that she wants to have happen at the house, and I don't do it, I'm undermining my own authority in front of her and the kids. In some ways, I'm a guest in her house. Kind of interesting to consider. That doesn't mean I can't have input or say, I'd like this to be done, or I think that we should do this. But the house is to be something that the wife takes care of and has oversight to. We see several different aspects of productivity given in the Bible, whether it be through Proverbs. We see this in the New Testament. Interesting things to consider. Proverbs 10:4 says, "Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." And we saw already with companionship, two get a better outcome than just one. It increases. And then finally, if you're taking notes, Proverbs 13:4, Proverbs 21:5, and then, of course, Proverbs 31, the compliment of a wife to her husband and just what she is able to do with her time. But then finally, we actually see, there is protection. And this is a result of the fall. And we can't really go to too many places, but if you're taking notes again, Proverbs 5, Proverbs 7, and Proverbs 9, 13 through 18 are all places discussing protection and dangers that occur because sexual immorality abounds in our society. And God has created marriage as a protection. And Paul actually addresses that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, starting in verse 1. Now, concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. But because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman to have her own husband. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement, for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay, so there it is. Marriage is for partnership or companionship. It's for procreation. It's for productivity. And then it's also designed as protection in a sin-cursed world as well. So application. How do we go about glorifying God? Whether we eat or drink or get married, how do we glorify God? We glorify God by living out the roles, responsibilities, and tasks that God has assigned to us in a joyful, willing way. Marriage is, yes, it is for companionship, but it is not merely for us to get our love cup filled. It's not primarily about us. It's about glorifying God. God can use, and we could spend a very long time talking about it, but marriage is used as one of God's ways of sanctifying us, making us more Christ-like. You bring someone in you bring two people in close proximity to one another, and there's going to be conflict, right? We're going to be addressing this later on. There's going to be things that come up. We're not always unified. We don't always want what's best for the other person. We are selfish people. We are sinners, and God uses marriage in a way. I used to think I was a fairly generous, kind person, and then I got married and I saw how unsacrificial and ungenerous and unkind I really could be. And then it started to look, maybe you're doing a little bit better, and then I had kids. And what does it reveal? It reveals more about myself that I need help with. And I can either respond in faith and obedience and humility, or I can try to do what Adam and Eve did and say, it's the other person. Right? And so as we continue on in our series for Sunday school, considering marriage and the family, we understand that God has created it for a purpose, and it should be our desire to live those purposes out, and we'll be looking at those purposes and intentions and how we go about doing that in more detail as we go. Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you for the love that you've shown us. We pray that you'd help us to honor and glorify you in our lives today, the way that we interact with one another, with our spouses, with children, and with those that we interact with. Thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you for your love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right.